Hello everyone, and welcome to Autodesk Exec Connect. I'm Amy Marks, Autodesk's Vice President of Industrialized Construction, also known as the Queen of Prefab. We are very excited for you to be joining us today for what will be a valuable, collaborative, and interactive session along with your industry peers. It's a unique opportunity to bring together leadership for architects, engineers, contractors, and owners in the building and infrastructure industries for a discussion on digital transformation challenges and an opportunity for discovery around data, sustainability, and talent. We hope you enjoy Exec Connect, and I'll see you on the main stage.
From desktops to data centers, CompuServe to the cloud, the orderly march of progress. Yeah, no. Progress only looks orderly after it's happened. Before it's happened, it's problem after problem after whose idea was this anyway? Unworkable, unfeasible, impractical, impossible. But then you put your head down and you work the problem until answers emerge. New solutions that power you through the next problem. And the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Until you get to greener buildings, cleaner cars, smarter factories, bigger blockbusters, interplanetary landers, walking cars. 4 decades of solutions. But it's always been about one thing, finding new ways past whatever problem stands in our way. And we're restless to do more. And that's why we love problems. Because we know when you combine the right solutions, when you merge fields, and converge the technologies no one else can, what's wrong with right now can become what's better about what's next. It's about opportunities, not obstacles. It's about unleashing your talent, not restraining it. It's about unlocking insights in your data. It's about making the things that actually make the world a better place. So let's get out there and do just that. Let's blur boundaries. Let's reinvent rules. Let's redraw the lines that define your talent, your business, your entire ecosystem. Let's go do what doers love to do. Let's not wait for progress. Let's make it. Autodesk it.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Autodesk Exec Connect event. My name is Ben Thompson, and I will be your host over the next 90 minutes or so. I hope 2022 has started off well for you all. Today, as that video alluded to, we will be exploring digital transformation and convergence trends in the architecture, engineering, and construction industries. Because despite a recent acceleration in digital activity across the board, challenges do still remain. Data too often sits in silos across the various stages of a project, and disciplines rarely work from a single source of truth. In many cases, there is a lack of effective workflow integration across different project teams. Accurate project forecasting remains an aspiration for many, and firms face increasingly fierce competition to attract and retain employees at a time when our understanding of what the future workplace looks like is rapidly changing. Meanwhile, underpinning all of that, the responsibility to reduce carbon emissions, eliminate waste, and address the climate change reality has never been greater. The convergence of new technologies, methodologies, and ways of collaborating offers scope to meet many of these challenges head-on. So what do you need to know, and how do you take the next steps on that journey? That is what we will be looking at today. So what does today look like? Well, technology is not only changing how we design, make, and maintain the built environment, it's also changing how we collaborate. Later on, we'll be hearing from the excellent Phil Bernstein, Associate Dean and Adjunct Professor over at the Yale School of Architecture, to find out how digital delivery is enabling us to work more fluidly across different projects, disciplines, and industries. We'll also be looking at how to channel digital tools and capabilities to help meet some of the data, sustainability and talent challenges we all face. That's with our brilliant panel. Emily Bisaga-Dunn and Anthony Ruto from Autodesk, Slack's Evelyn Lee and Matt Goff from Mace. Phil Bernstein will also be joining us for that one. Ahead of that, Autodesk's Paul Markovits will be digging into emerging trends in the built environment space and looking at how to re-engineer business strategy to meet the needs of a converging industry. Really looking forward to that. And we're also fortunate enough to be joined by the good folks over at Ink Factory, who will be producing a real-time illustration of some of the key talking points raised in today's sessions. A visual map, if you like, of the event and where those discussions take us. We'll be checking in on progress throughout the course of the event. Can't wait to see how that develops. But before we get there, we need someone to help set our scene, to provide some insights into some of the challenges happening in this space, because we've probably all seen rapid acceleration in our use of digital and data over the past 2 years. McKinsey believes we witnessed a decade's worth of transformation in just 6 months during the course of the pandemic. So what does that shift mean in the context of the architecture, engineering and construction industries? And how do we effectively harness this moment of change in order to drive further innovation moving forward? Here to provide her thoughts, please welcome our opening speaker today, Autodesk's VP for Industrialised Construction Strategy and Evangelism, the brilliant Amy Marks. Amy, many thanks for joining us here today.
It's my pleasure.
Lovely to see you, Amy. Lovely to see you. Amy, we have got a lot of stuff, a lot of thoughts, a lot of insights to get through today. So I think without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you to walk us through our opening thoughts, to set the scene for us today. Your slides should be up there now. So I'm going to hand over to you and get out of the way. Amy, over to you.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate you for having me today. It's great to see everybody here today. And I think what's really important for us to learn about convergence, there's so much out there. If your business is changing today, most likely it's happening because of convergence. You know, we see technology actually converging. I always say this is no longer my phone. This is my babysitter, my map, my, social life. It's my entertainment. It's my computer. Technology is converging. And also we see process converging. It's no longer just a process for design or a process for manufacturing or a process. We need a platform to connect lots of these processes together. They're no longer living in silos by themselves in our space. And then industries are converging. And that is most evident that when convergence happens in our space, we're seeing industrialized construction. We're seeing architects that need to understand kits of parts. We even see them opening up their own fabrication facilities. I have owners opening up fabrication facilities. We hear them saying playbook kits of parts. They are getting much more involved in the make and then design. We see contractors actually moving into the systems integration space. And obviously they've always been, involved in design build, but we see the makers also converging. We see manufacturers converging, true building product manufacturers, and subcontractors actually converging into the makers. So what does that mean? It means business models are actually changing. And that's important because people are no longer living in their business models of these silos. And so therefore it's not enough just to have automation within your silo or digitization within your silo. We know that the business outcomes are different, your drivers are different. That's super important to note, right? And we see a lot of industry trends happening. Look, a lot of this started way before the pandemic was going on. And we know that, it's only sped up as we've talked about, right? So you've seen globalization and urbanization happening, climate change, and obviously the requirements of all of this are being, imposed upon us. And rightly so, COVID-19 has made things just move so much faster. But I do think some of the industry trends that we need to recognize about industrialized construction have been happening for 20 years due to things like project complexity, the labor shortages, and a lot about consolidation, right? As you have pressure on systems, things tend to merge and move together. That's important to note. So we've seen a lot of this in the news, but you are feeling it most in your businesses. And I think the drivers for your businesses have changed. By the way, I said this at the MEP Innovation Forum this week. Sometimes we forget, just like other ecosystems, because we're not an industry, we're an ecosystem of lots of industries. They use the old adage, garbage in and garbage out. We have to start thinking the same. You can have lots of information here, you can have lots of data, you can automate lots of things. If it's not the right data, if If it's not the data that actually results in something real, then we have to think about what is the outcome of that going to be, right? So McKinsey actually did a report prior to COVID. It kind of came out in the beginning of COVID, and they said 45% of everything in our ecosystem is going to move towards industrialized construction in the next 15 years. Now, they talked about why that is. The industry dynamics are changing. We're seeing lots of differences about the customer base, about the labor, so all the things we talked about in the trends, right? Integration and consolidation. And the emerging disruptions, there were actually about 9 they mentioned, but about 66% of the respondents thought that industrialization and digitization had the highest impact. That was going to be in the next 15 years. If you read down into the study itself, it said in the next 1 to 3 years, industrialization as a result of a product led approach, not a process, a product led approach is going to have the most impact. Now, that was almost 2 years ago, that study. And so, interestingly enough, we've seen this happening for the last 5 to 10 years. I'm showing an example. This was shown at the Advancing Prefabrication show that's coming up in April. And this was GSK talking about their kit of parts, how they're looking at the pieces and parts of their manufacturing facilities. They're not looking at it anymore like it's design, build pieces of the building. They are really recognizing that not just the equipment, but the building itself is looked at as kits of parts and equipment, and the aggregation of those and the generative design that they can get out of productizing these things. They are looking at their buildings and digital twin and things like that differently because of the articulation of product-led approach as evidenced by industrialized construction. We had a big event last year at Advancing Prefab, and at that we had a lot of CEOs and VPs of lots of different companies from across the ownership of big owners, big manufacturers, big GCs, big architects. 82% of the people in the audience, of almost 1,000 people, said that their companies, they're describing themselves as convergence customers, meaning crossing over one of the silos as evidenced by some sort of industrialized construction. 79% of them are on a journey for productization. Heavy MEP building applications are moving fastest. Why? The complexity is there, the cost is there, the risk is there for many of these companies. We always talk a lot about housing and industrialized construction. Actually, the majority of industrialized construction that's happening is in the heavy MEP applications of data centers, hospitals, manufacturing facilities. That's the places we need this the most. And I think because of that, we have to really think about how do we at Autodesk change what's going on. It's not enough just to have a model of something. Building information modeling is great, and the eye is information, but it needs to be informed by something intelligent and real. So people keep saying these words, design, make, and I keep saying we have to flip it. It needs to be operate, make, design. How do we create a place where we can get information in real time about what can actually be made and understand the rules and constraints of them, but still work within our own tools as designers, as an example, but pull the real data so that it's discoverable. We can still customize it and have one-to-many mapping, so one model to many instances, but still only change things and customize them within their manufacturing constraints. You need manufacturing tools and software in order to do that. It needs to be in the cloud, so it's shareable. We need to digitize the make information in real time and allow architects to still customize it and use it to free them and enable them to do more things and spend their time on the parts of the building that they want to spend time on. So we have a framework that we've actually developed at Autodesk. And really, I work through the customer success and consulting organizations here to help people on this transformation. And I would tell you that, Paul's going to talk to you about outcomes. And this is an aggregation of many of the different outcomes that our customers are looking for. They want a strategy for how things are going to be done. I would tell you, you first need to look at readiness and foundational skills and tools and culture. You can't connect the platform stack in many different ways unless you have the stack. And it's not just about Autodesk. I always say, this is my Apple platform, my phone. It comes with preloaded software on it. But then there's an ecosystem, think the Forge ecosystem and apps that are available, and other companies that have capabilities that you can connect through APIs. And the thing about a platform is that it's a unique end user experience. I always say, look, I'm a New Jersey single mom, eats keto, can't get from here to there without Waze on my phone. My experience with this platform is different than a 25-year-old married farmer in Iowa using the same product, right? So we've got to transform across this through productization And only then can we optimize with things like industrialized construction. The last thing I'll say is we're moving towards circularity for this. Digital waste exponentially leads to physical waste. The number one thing you can do on this planet is get manufacturing informed design productization to avoid the waste, the 40% of construction waste in our landfills. I'm here to help you as a resource at Autodesk. Our consulting and customer success organizations are here too. And I'm always available. You can reach out to me on any social media platform at the Queen of Prefab.
Great stuff, Amy. Many thanks for setting our scene here today. I love those themes, that the idea of taking a more product-led approach, this idea of data, treating data as an asset, circularity and sustainability, of course, they are all themes that are going to run through today's events. So thank you so much for touching upon those and for setting our scene. Amy Marks, many thanks.
Thank you.
Great stuff. OK, fascinating stuff from Amy. We've started to touch upon some of the macro trends. We've started to address ideas around digital transformation, industry convergence, of course, new ways of thinking. So let's now dig into some of those concepts in a bit more detail, not least around how those shifts are impacting your business strategy. Here's a look at why focusing on key value drivers and real business outcomes is essential to transformation success. Please welcome the wonderful Paul Markovitz, Senior Manager for the Outcome Engineering team over at Autodesk. Good afternoon, Paul. Good morning, I should say.
Good afternoon, Ben. How are you doing?
Oh, you are here in the UK with me, Paul. Lovely to hear from you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Great stuff, great stuff. So listen, once again, we were kind of rattling through this, and I want to make sure that we can cover as much ground as possible. So I'm going to hand over to you to kind of talk us through some of these ideas. Amy talked a little bit about outcomes there in that last session. I know that's something that you're very much going to be talking about in this next session. And then maybe we'll come back to you for some thoughts after you've finished. But for now, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. So Amy talked an awful lot about change that needs to happen in our industry. Are you ready for that change? And how are you going to drive the firms that you lead to actually change? It's not actually the strongest that's going to survive or the most intelligent. It's going to be about who can adapt most. I'm obviously not Charles Darwin. My name is Paul Markovitz. I run the Outcome Engineering team at Autodesk. As you already heard from Amy, there are many macro trends that are affecting the way that we do business today, and also industry-specific problems as well that we're trying to address. And these can provide the catalyst to drive the start of change. But as we'll see, industry change is a very long road, and our strategy to drive that change needs to be focused not just on that burning platform of these macro trends, but also on the outcomes that we're trying to drive for ourselves and our customers and society in the future. To try and help navigate this, my team at Autodesk has been working on an outcome framework to help companies like yourselves look at what you're really trying to achieve, your desired outcomes, and then to marry technology investment to those outcomes. We've been working with engineering firms to look at how do they work with contractors. So architects and engineers, how do we help them grow their business, become more operationally efficient, address risk in their markets, and improve health, safety, and sustainability. Similarly, for construction companies, how do they get the best out of their project teams? How do they deliver the right quality and on time with safe working practices? And also for owners, how do they engage their supply chain and actually deliver outcomes both for themselves and for wider society? Making good technology investment is really about deciding which outcomes are most important to you and then matching the technology to that, rather than just making investment for technology's sake. Once you understand those outcomes you're trying to drive, you can think about the capabilities you need as an organization in order to try and unlock those outcomes. So for an owner, this might be looking at things like building out capabilities for BIM standards management so that they can control the right information coming into their business and operate their assets more effectively. And once you actually understand which capabilities are important to those customers, we can start helping them think about where they are in terms of maturity in those capabilities, understand where they are today and where they actually need to get to in terms of the workflows they need to use and the technologies to invest in to improve those capabilities and actually achieve those outcomes. And we like to think of this journey of digital transformation in 4 parts. So where are we as an industry on this journey? We actually did some research last year with Dodge Data Analytics and started looking at this across the markets that we serve. In the AEC sector, we saw that across the world, people are saying they are already on this journey towards digital transformation. Some people actually think they've already achieved their goal in digital transformation, which is really interesting. Because when you start to think about this framework in terms of what we just talked about, and we start to think where we are really, the data starts looking slightly different. The first phase is to digitize. And really, this is about, rather than creating drawings, actually creating models and data, that information that Amy talked about earlier. When we looked at this with Dodge Data Analytics, we saw that globally only 52% of firms are actually using BIM and BIM methodologies on more than 50% of their projects. So there's still actually a really long way to go here. The second area is, and when we look at North American designers as well, who are actually slightly further ahead on this digitization journey, we can see that they've really been understanding the outcomes that they're driving. So being clear on that why for them potentially is helping them actually understand the return on investment and drive that change required in the market. The next area is connect. So how do you connect people to the data that you're actually creating in those workflows? Again, this has been really interesting during the recent times. Amy talked about that trend of globalization happening already, and we've seen firms using follow the sun models, insourcing with offshore locations and things like that to move data around the world. But COVID and the current pandemic has created a completely different environment where we've had to rapidly create hybrid working environments. Whereas all the dots on this diagram before were people in your offices, now more often than not, they're going to be people working from their own home offices, regardless of where they are in the world, and you need to connect them. How do you use platforms like BIM Collaborate Pro to connect these people and actually allow them to start co-authoring models and managing documentation independently of where they physically are? And this also addresses some of the industry challenges we have as well. How do we bring that complexity together so that we can understand how these complex designs fit together and the different packages of work? And how do we deal with some of the labor shortages, the skills that we need? How do we bring them to bear across multiple projects across the globe, independently of where they sit? We're seeing firms like Becker, who have actually taken a strategy of improving their model co-authoring skills globally and have really taken that strategy, being able to drive some amazing outcomes in the market. They managed to use follow the sun models and low-cost resource centers to actually drive outcomes like a reduction of 33% in their project design time. So whereas those first 2 stages are really about playing defense in the market and are starting to become table stakes for how you need to compete, what you really want to be doing is thinking about your strategy in terms of how you go and play offense in the market and starting bringing new services to bear and opening new opportunities for yourself. And that's where these latter 2 stages of optimize and evolve come in. Again, these trends we see in the marketplace are driving what firms are doing and what opportunities are out there. And one of the first of those that we're seeing is around this industry consolidation and convergence. Autodesk also serves the manufacturing market, and there we're really starting to see our customers try and develop what they're calling an integrated factory model to drive improvements to the flexibility of their manufacturing processes, increasing the throughputs of their factories, and improving time to market. To do this, they need data about the building fabric they're working in and the building services that connect to their production lines. And that's starting to bring opportunity for architecture and engineering firms to provide that data to them and even assist in that digital transformation for the customers. And also to our construction customers as well, these people need data handed over both for their new build factories and refitting lines within their existing factories. The second opportunity that we're seeing is something that Amy talked about in depth, which is industrialized construction. How do you start productizing the built environment and start unlocking some of the great outcomes there around reduction in rework, improved safety, having less people on a building site, and of course those sustainability outcomes that Amy was talking about. As well as general contractors moving to these modern methods of construction, we're also seeing engineering firms actually start looking at new business models, especially in the housing market. We're seeing examples of those firms partnering with specialist subcontractors to actually design and fabricate kit-of-part houses that can be configured in different ways around standard products to create different options. So how do you start thinking differently about your offering in the market and the partnerships you need to be able to successfully unlock these outcomes and drive further opportunities for yourselves? Again, all of this is dependent on having model data at the front of it. You can't drive these processes without, and the fabrication without having a model. So that digitization has to be the first step for being able to execute these strategies. The final example I want to talk to you is about sustainability outcomes. We're starting to see customers actually think about owner outcomes and how do they help those owners that they're working with drive better outcomes for society as well. A great example of this is the design of Hotel Magdalena by Lake Flato, where they've actually tried to drive huge carbon reduction in the embodied carbon in this project. Once again, and I can't stress this enough, this is all driven by the model. You can't drive these sort of outcomes and start going and providing these services if you're not thinking about digitization. So that base platform for being able to go and play a fence in the market is incredibly important. So I hope with that, I've been able to give you a few examples of how you might think differently about driving outcomes and how your strategy around the digitization, connection, optimization, and evolution of your digital strategy could help you drive outcomes for people. It's up to you now to think about how you go and drive that strategy with your firms. And if you need Autodesk to help, we're always here to help you. So thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, great stuff. Many thanks, Paul, for walking us through it. What really strikes me about that is this idea that the digital transformation is no longer a competitive differentiator. It's table stakes, as you said. I would love to dive into some of those ideas with you a little bit further, especially around this idea of outcomes. But before we get to that, if you don't mind just holding fire, I'm going to go to our audience and ask them a couple of quick questions just to get some thoughts from them on some of those ideas. We've obviously heard about some of the issues, and I'd love to know what you folks all think. So you should see a question appearing on your screens now. So we would like to know, which of the following value drivers are most important to you when you think about embarking on your project? Paul was talking about value drivers there. You should see a drop-down list of options for you to choose from. Is it about business growth or operational efficiency? Is it about risk? Is HSE and sustainability a big issue for you, or cost? Or is it about schedule and quantity? What are the big value drivers for you? I'll leave that poll open just for a moment or two. Okay, so what are those key value drivers? Feel free to let us know what that is. We'll dig into some of these results with Paul in a moment and get some thoughts from him, some reflections. Okay, let's close that poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Poll is now closed, as you can see. All right, great. Many thanks for providing your answers, everyone. Okay, so let's go to our second poll now. And this time, we would like to know the following. When you think about outcomes, which of the following are most important? Is it about improving data exchange? Is it improving forecast accuracy? What about attracting and retaining top talent or reducing the environmental impact? Is it about reducing or removing emissions? Again, I will give you a few moments to get your thoughts across. Okay, so this time all about outcomes. Paul was talking a bit about outcomes there, starting there and actually determining what the business wants to achieve. So what's most important for you? Is it about improving data exchange? Is it about improving forecast accuracy, attracting and retaining top talent, reducing the environmental impact, or reducing or removing emissions? Okay, let's close that poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Poll is now closed. Many thanks, folks. So let's dig into some of those findings in a bit more detail now. And to do that, I would like to welcome back the brilliant Paul Markovits. Paul, thank you for your patience, for sticking with us. We've asked a couple of questions there of our audience, and perhaps we can dig into some of the results and see what they said and see how that resonates with you. You obviously have a lot of experience in this space. You're starting to talk about this with a lot of customers and clients and various different organisations, see some trends emerging. Let's perhaps go to the findings from our first poll, if we can. So here we were asking all about some of the value drivers. What are the most important value drivers? And as we can see there, operational efficiency, probably no surprise, is the big winner there at 34%. We've got business growth at 26%. The other results kind of shared around there. So we've got health, safety and sustainability at 12%, schedule and quantity at 11%. Paul, let's maybe come to you and get some thoughts from you. Any surprises there? Is that what you're seeing in the space? Yeah, what would you expect those results to show?
I don't think they're massively surprising, actually, Ben. I think that it's interesting the way we were talking about this with playing offense and defense in the market. Business growth is really about going and playing offense, those new offerings, being better at going and winning the market. So it's interesting to have a quarter of people saying that that's the most important thing for them. They also need to be thinking about those digital platforms to be able to do that. So it suggests that they're on their way to being able to do that and to unlock those outcomes. The other one that's interesting for me there, not interesting is the operational efficiency. I would expect that to be high. The one that I've seen growing more and more is around the health, safety and sustainability stuff. Obviously with things like COP26, we've seen a huge focus on that. You see, part of the challenge here is that people don't really know how to quantify the value that they'll receive from these things. They understand it's great for society, but is it good for them as a business, in terms of operating margin and things like that? So connecting in, how do we actually quantify the financial value of sustainability and driving those outcomes is going to be really important going forward to make sure that we can reach the commitments that we've made around events like COP26. Yeah,
we're only going to see grow, I imagine, in the next few years as the focus, the spotlight shines more and more on climate change issues, sustainability issues, etc. OK, great. Well, let's maybe take a look at the results from our second poll now, if we can. This time, we were looking more about outcomes. So which of the following are most important to you? Improving data exchange, 43% there. That is the clear winner, but yeah, relatively even spread there between the others. Reducing or removing emissions on that sustainability theme, only 2%, but perhaps changing some of those ideas around sustainability, which I think reducing the environmental impact was the previous answer as well. So maybe that's one of the reasons why that's so low. Let's maybe get some thoughts from you, Paul, on that outcome poll.
Yeah, again, I don't see the improving data exchange as a surprise. Actually, we get a lot of feedback from our customers around challenges with data exchange when people are on different platforms and things like that. And it's a huge focus for Autodesk. How do we use these platforms to connect people, but also allow them to interoperate data? And there's a lot of focus on that. Amy mentioned Forge before, which is our platform for that. There's a lot of focus in that development on how to do that. The one that is quite low there from what we're seeing in the marketplace was the attract and retain talent. I think with the great resignation that's going on, and we're hearing lots about that, the kind of talent shortages, I'd actually expected that to be a bit higher and more on people's agendas at the moment. So it's slightly surprising that wasn't higher, because that has seemed to be a real big trend for people recently.
Yeah, really interesting. And I guess that improving data exchange, that's an enabler really for a lot of those other elements. So yeah, again, no surprise that it's so high. Paul, many thanks for providing your thoughts. Much appreciated. Great to have you with us here today.
Thank you so much.
Lovely stuff. Thank you, Paul. OK, so we talked a bit about outcomes there, but what does that mean in the era of digital delivery? And what are the challenges in tying outcomes to your digital delivery process? Let's find out as we move on to our next session, and what a session that is. Our next guest is an architect, technologist and educator who is Associate Dean and Adjunct Professor at the Yale School of Architecture, where he's been teaching since 1988. He's a Senior Fellow of the Design Futures Council and former Principal at Pelly Clark Pelly Architects, where he managed many of the firm's most complex commissions, including projects for Reagan National Airport, the Mayo Clinic and Goldman Sachs, to name just a few. He's one of the most celebrated architecture commentators and thinkers working in America today, here to talk about the grand challenges of building and how to deliver outcomes in an era of digital delivery. Please welcome the excellent Phil Bernstein. Phil, great to have you with us here today.
Thank you, Ben. I appreciate it. And you skipped right over the 16 years I spent as a VP at Autodesk working on the BIM project. So
there was so much. You've done so much, Phil. I can't squeeze it all into a short 30-second bio. You could please check out Phil's bio on all the social platforms. It is extensive. Phil, we've got loads to get through, so I'm going to hand over to you. But I will be back with some questions towards the end of the session. And folks, if you do have any questions for Phil during his presentation, then please do let us know what they are in the chat, and we'll try and get you up here to ask him personally. But for now, Phil, over to you.
Great, thank you, Ben. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit and talk a little bit more conceptually about this intersection of some of the themes that you've heard introduced by Amy and Paul around convergence and digital trends and the challenges that we face in the building industry. And I do so from the perspective of both a former practitioner, but also someone who many of you know spent a fair amount of time at Autodesk working on the BIM project. And I think in order to really contextualize where we're going as an industry, we actually have to go all the way back to the Renaissance, to the original converger, who was Brunelleschi. Brunelleschi was the design build contractor for the dome over the Duomo in Florence. And in that sense, he was the convergence of all of the building problems as a single entity that integrated information flow, data exchange, decision-making, risk. He was a sort of giant Renaissance converger. But as you know, at the same time that Brunelleschi was working, his friend Alberti was proposing a different way of thinking about building things. What Alberti said was, ideas and things are different. That the thinking about a building and the thinking about the design of a thing and the making of a thing are two entirely different phenomenon. And in that sense, Alberti created a separation, a deconvergence that has challenged us as an industry or an ecosystem really in a lot of ways ever since. And my friend Mario Carpo, who teaches at UCL at the Bartlett School at the University College London, tells an interesting story about Brunelleschi and how he transmitted information about the project. When Brunelleschi was in the field and he wanted to describe to one of the workers something that he wanted done, he would take out his knife and a radish and carve a little model of the thing that he wanted to have happen. And after the exchange of information had occurred with the radish, he would eat the radish in order to make sure that there was no record of what he had actually told anyone to do. So in this sense, this kind of information discontinuity problem has been super interesting, I think, really since the Enlightenment, since the Renaissance. And so what we've tried to do as an industry is exchange radishes for other kinds of information transmission, whether it's this Smithson's drawing from 1499 of a rose window. I'm sorry, my slides are getting a little bit crazy here. There we go. Or this CAD drawing from the Petronas Tower in the late 90s. We have tried as an industry various experiments to solve this problem of the radish. How do we move information from one set of capabilities to another set of capabilities? And at the same time that technology was evolving with things like CAD and BIM, we were also experimenting with various kinds of ways of assembling a project team to optimize some combination of the relationship of information transaction and what I would broadly call outcomes. In other words, what are we trying to get done on this project? And I've been teaching a number of courses and doing some research on this since I left Autodesk on this question of convergence across the players in the AEC industry. And you're starting to see the evolution of a whole series of models out there, whether it's architects acting in various capacities, contractor-led design management, vertically integrated owners, vertical integrators who are not constructors, but orchestrate the players together, construction-led automated design processes, and then ultimately this idea of this kind of Uber idea that really emerged simultaneously with BIM, which is the concept of persistent integrated project delivery teams. In other words, teams that stay together and deliver projects based on outcome business models, which we'll get to in a moment. And of course, the big change in all of this, the big driver in all of this, was the accelerated influence of high-powered technology finally being available to the AEC ecosystem, whether it's cloud computing or mobile devices. Really what this infrastructure allows us to do is take all this digital information that's available out there, move it anywhere to the point of work. And as Paul mentioned earlier, this was never more clear than during the early days of the pandemic, where large parts of the construction industry were remote almost immediately. And the original thesis here, and I want to point out that it's now 2022, which means it's been 2 decades since the project that I worked on at Autodesk to begin the BIM exercise, the Revit acquisition, was initiated. We did that first shift at Autodesk internally from AutoCAD to BIM in 2002. That was 20 years ago. I have grandchildren now, people. I mean, we've talked earlier about the transitions, the rapid transitions in the building industry. They ain't so rapid. Things are actually don't really go as far as we want. And when I left Autodesk in 2016, I wrote a book about this question of the relationship between business models, digital process, and technology. And I put forward an assertion that we were all talking about at the time, which was there is a virtual relationship in the components of the building industry that were in theory catalyzed by BIM that created reinforcing data relationships between all the pieces of the equation. And this was the dream that somehow building information modeling would create that coherent ligature that would create self-reinforcing data flows. But the problem, of course, is, and I think the poll that you guys just did emphasizes this, without some external force making this happen, what we in the building industry tend to largely be concerned about is internal optimization. And we saw it, 26% of you said growth and 34% of you said internal efficiency were the primary value drivers. Those value drivers are uninteresting to the people that buy our services. Those value drivers are internal to our own business operations. And so one of the things I want to talk about here is a stance on how we can change that perspective in an interesting way. And so here we are in 2022. It's been 20 years since at least Autodesk as a global provider has been providing BIM to the broad industry. The dream of BIM is this hospital project image, which I've been using for about a decade. And you look at that image on the left of the building information model and you say, wow, those guys really understood what they were doing when they were building that building. Every atom has been modeled. But the real true facts, and these were demonstrated earlier by Paul when he said that only 52% of worldwide AEC firms are using BIM on more than half of their projects. We're still using BIM as a radish. We're still using it to organize drawing information and transmit that information across the supply chain without any other kind of value driver. But 20 years later, I think where we are is a we're now in a different kind of context because the building industry is broadly, but in a very disorganized and episodic way, beginning to digitize. This is some information from my friend Jesse Devitt, who's really at least here in the States, the leading venture capitalist in AECO technology. And this is how he kind of organizes his thinking about different emergent technologies that he sees and their relationship to one another. So what we have here is an enormous explosion in digitization. And of course, when 43% of you tell me that data exchange is a problem, this is where that data exchange problem is coming from. We're really using building information modeling to do this, but our real problem is dealing with this. And so let's talk a little bit about what that means and where things might be going, right? Really what we have going on right now is something I call representational dispersion. And representational dispersion means we have all these different technologies and we can create our own taxonomy. This is mine, where different kinds of building information models are used for different parts of the process, surrounded by other kinds of tools. And really what we have going on now is, instead of some larger concept of data coherence, we have lots of little building information models out there. And now there's a new thing going on called a digital twin. Maybe somebody can explain to me what that is. I don't really completely understand it, but somehow it's going to be a convergence of all this other stuff that's going on. There's a real lack of informational coherence out there, because what we're really looking for conceptually is an idea of Big BIM, but it doesn't exist quite yet. And I think one of the reasons it doesn't exist is, or there are really two reasons that it doesn't exist. One is, despite the explosion of technology, we still don't have a coherent theory quite yet about how all this stuff works together. But as those of you who've heard me speak before know and have read my work, I also argue very strongly from Paul's perspective that business model infrastructure has to change in order to get to technology coherence. And so one of the ways I've been looking at this is to try to look at a different kind of technology timeline that suggests that, in Brunelleschi's time, everything was analog. We switched the radishes to CAD in 1985. We've had an era of BIM, who knows how long this is going to go on. We're going to have an interstitial period now of data, I'll call it data integration in a charming way, but it's really data craziness, right? But there's another player coming into the fore here, which is artificial intelligence. And one of the ways to look at this progression of technologies is in terms of the degrees of precision that they offer us as AEC professionals. And so the representation of the thing we're trying to make is increasingly more precise, but only in very discrete steps, from building complexity, geometric complexity. BIM's given us better drawings. I think through the era of data integration, we're going to have a lot of up and downs in terms of our levels of precision, but ultimately there'll have to be some X factor, and I suspect it's artificial intelligence, that will get us to a more coherent data representation, because there's just too much stuff out there for some global intergalactic theory of interoperability to actually work. But simultaneously with the evolution of these technologies, has become we're seeing an evolution in process automation, which is something that Amy talked about, right? There's very little process automation going on in the analog age, some lightweight automation going on during the CAD age. The BIM brought us the ideas of organizing data and making better drawings. There's going to be a lot of discontinuous process automation over the next 10 years. But until we get to some idea of representational coherence or information exchange, none of this stuff is going to make sense. And I just finished a second book that Reva is going to be publishing in a couple of months, where I put this thesis that the building industry might lay out a strategy using artificial intelligence that could get us to this degree of higher coherence. And I want to touch briefly on the question of, are the robot overlords going to take over our jobs? I don't think so. This little image on the right here is one that I derived when I was writing my book by going to the Van Allen Institute's website, where you can type in a phrase and the AI generates an image. And the phrase I typed in was "a building in a city," and this is the hot mess that came out. So it's early days in the AI world, but AI does give us the opportunity to look at a lot of this information. And so when you start to look at the sorts of data representation platforms and the evolution of data ecosystems, systems like some of the things that my former colleagues at Autodesk are working on, you can begin to see folks working on this problem, right? What's the relationship between work in progress in a given firm, the relationship between delivery teams, and then how all does that stuff get out into the outside world? And even our friends from McKinsey that Amy touched on earlier, this is their definition of manufacturing convergence. It all is based on a thesis of some kind of a data backbone that allows us all to work coherently together. But what I would argue is there has to be some outside force that creates the desire and the need to get to that degree of coherence that will not happen based on technology alone. Because, guys, sorry, I got by myself. We have a ton of technology out there. Every one of these tools that can be organized on the Autodesk Construction Cloud is a little tiny outcome generator, right? It has a specific problem that is designed to create a specific outcome. And we've got to figure out a way to pull all that stuff together in a more coherent fashion. And so you've seen one theory of outcomes that Paul presented. You've responded to a second theory of outcomes with the poll. I'm now going to give you a third theory of outcomes that I've been thinking about and writing about pretty extensively over the last couple of years. And the thesis here is the building industry has to get in the job of outcomes that our clients are looking for. Right now, we operate in a highly commoditized fashion of value exchange around commodity. And that's why everybody's so wrapped around the axle of growth and efficiency, which our clients could care less about, right? Our clients care about getting things done. And so what I've written about is this idea, and I wrote about in my first book from the architect's perspective, that there's actually a hierarchy of outcomes, a theory of outcomes that we could use to organize our strategy for getting the building industry ecosystem around making things happen for clients. And at the very lowest level of that hierarchy are what I call transactional outcomes. In other words, being efficient in the way that we provide our services to our clients, not making, not running out of money, not making transactional mistakes. And this hierarchy grows up a kind of pyramid through what I'll call executional outcomes, improving the means and methods of construction, operational outcomes, which are asset performance, and ultimately aspirational outcomes, which are the reason our clients want us to build things in the first place. And we have to kind of learn how to go to the outcome gym and learn to exercise at the lower levels of these kinds of operational outcomes first, before we can earn the right to climb up the pyramid. So the way I've been talking to my students about this is on a graph that looks like this. There are these 4 types of outcomes, whether it's transactional performance outcomes, executional, operational, or aspirational. And in order to generate value for clients, the value proposition accelerates as you move from left to right on this chart, but it also requires a tighter relationship between the folks who are involved in the creation of the building asset. So at the lower level of my graph here, transactional outcomes are things like saying, as designers, for example, we can design this thing on schedule, we can meet a certain level of quality, we can get to a certain degree of program conformance. Executional outcomes are about the things that our clients kind of expect us to do, but are still really, really hard, and are places where the makers and the designers have to work together. And those are things like performing to budget, meeting project schedules, installing systems to specifications, making things happen that are properly durable. These are things on the left-hand side of the equation that our clients expect us to do. Where it starts to get interesting for them, however, and where the value curve accelerates, is on the right-hand side of this chart, where when we make projects that perform at high levels of systems, have reduced carbon footprints, optimize staffing, create lower kinds of maintenance. These are things that clients are super interested in. They want to make this stuff happen. And as a consequence, ultimately get to their highest level outcomes, which are about the things they build things to do, like make people healthier, or perform economically, or whatever. And we're at a particular moment, in my opinion, in the building industry where this kind of a strategy could not be more appropriate, because we have a lot of grand challenges as an industry. We have responsibilities to the public and to our clients around health, safety, and welfare. And those of you, and I'm following this carefully, following the Grenfell disaster, I mean, that was a supply chain delivery catastrophe of epic proportions. Climate change, we've already talked about. There's a lot of technology out there that can sort of deal with that kind of question. Questions of embodied carbon and understanding of the supply chain. These are all things that many of the technologies that are out there today allow us to do, but it's difficult to make them happen without coherence. This is a quick diagram of how I spent the summer of 2020 as a dean at the School of Architecture at Yale, where we suddenly became architectural epidemiologists and tried to figure out how we could run a school of architecture during a global pandemic in this Paul Rudolph building where we teach. And it's a pretty lengthy list. Questions of social justice in the built environment. These are all bigger issues that our clients are concerned about and want us to focus on, and are ways for us to create outcomes that have greater values. One that I've gotten extremely interested in recently is this question of forced labor in the building supply chain. And I know that with the Modern Slavery Act in the UK, there's been some activity around this, but it turns out that, as we all know, the AEC ecosystem supply chain is extremely opaque and has a tremendous amount of labor abuse. And trying to understand that labor abuse and reduce it is a grand problem for us in the building industry. And one of the ways I've been explaining this to my students is by explaining the relationship between their job and relationship to their client and this enslaved Brazilian steelworker who is 11 or 12 steps away from the architect in the supply chain. And so this diagram of the relationship between an enslaved worker in Brazil and a choice that you make as an architect is a perfect analog to what Amy was talking about earlier, where we want to understand how manufacturing, process, and constraint affects design decisions. And it's all about the integration of information and transparency and a convergence of processes. And so my argument would be the following. This idea of convergence and outcomes starts to become most interesting when we as an industry say that we can attack these grand challenges that our clients and society are really interested in. And that's the way we should look at this. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, I love that, Phil. I love the fact that there are so many big issues in play here. This isn't just about your own organisation. This is about the wider ecosystem, the wider industry, wider society as well. And I know that certainly it's struck a chord here with our audience, because I think we've got some questions. So we'll maybe go to our first question if we can. And I think first up we've got Chris from Mott McDonald. Hi there, Chris.
Hi, good afternoon to everybody, well, certainly in this time zone. Phil, I was privileged to attend a session that you gave at Autodesk University back in 2015, and the main theme of the conversation was around how contract models are typically a decade behind how we want to work at the time. Now, I've now been working in the industry since then, and I'm not seeing contract models change with the advent of all the advances we've made in digital processes and technology. So because you see a lot more of that, have you seen these changes, or are we falling further behind?
Well, it's a really great question. And interestingly, really consistent with what my colleagues at Autodesk have been working on, I've been doing some research on this question because, as you know, I was very active in the integrated project delivery movement in parallel with them. And so what we found is that while there's a low level of enthusiasm about these, the evolution of larger scale business models, right now there is much more activity in what I would call bottom-up integration, and what these guys are calling convergence. And I did a research project with my friend Renee Chang, who's the dean at University of Washington, where we looked at 100 AEC companies that were crossing at least one of the boundary conditions between design, operate, manufacture, and ownership. And there's a tremendous amount of activity out there right now that where the contract model changes because that particular value deliverer has picked a little tiny chunk to work on, and it's something that's controllable that they can also use technology for. So I think you're going to see much more activity kind of bottom up happening, rather than top down. Because, you know, as Amy said, we're not an industry, we're an ecosystem, and top down stuff does not happen quickly. You know, it's been, you know, we in 2015, we were 13 years into the BIM thing when you heard me give that talk. Have we really made that much more progress in the intervening 7 years? I don't think we have. I hate to say it. It's, you know, the great disappointment of my career that, you know, now I have grandkids and we're still making working drawings with BIM. It's a problem.
It's a great question. Thanks, Chris. Phil, anything we can do to speed that acceleration, you know, to kind of accelerate that bottom-up approach?
Well, I think that when these, I mean, this is an emergent thesis right now, but I think that when some of these bottom-up, convergent, interesting, innovative companies that are doing some of the things that they talked about, they're making and assembling and creating data infrastructure and starting to realize the potential of, you know, one big difference between 2015 is that there's $3 to $5 billion of investment in AEC startups now that didn't exist back then. When those folks start coming to the supply chain and saying, I promise that I can get this done and I'm going to get paid based on making this happen, as opposed to let's negotiate the lowest possible price for my result and then punish me if I fail to achieve it, that may start to create some of the granular change that we're talking about. God, I hope so. Because the top-down stuff just does not work in our industry.
Fingers crossed, Phil. Fingers crossed. Okay, that's a challenge for everybody here on the call to maybe try and affect some of that change. Chris, many thanks for the question. Much appreciated. Phil, we've got loads of chat happening on the you know, on the chat here in Zoom. Plenty more questions, but that is all we've got time for. There is an opportunity, folks, for you to get those questions over to Phil in the panel. Phil is taking part in our panel, so we will see you in a few moments' time, Phil. Many thanks for providing your thoughts. Much appreciated.
My pleasure. Enjoyed it.
Great stuff. OK, many thanks, Phil. So, as I mentioned earlier on, the visual storytelling element we're running here today in partnership with Ink Factory. So let's maybe take a quick look at how that visual representation of our key talking points is shaping up. Some really interesting thoughts there. We can see some of those key themes, outcomes, frameworks. You're moving towards artificial intelligence, of course. Business drivers are changing. We're getting more of a product-led approach. Some really interesting themes emerging there. And in just a moment, we're going to get a panel of experts up here on stage to dig into some of those themes in more detail and perhaps provide some practical learnings about what implementation of these ideas looks like in the field. But to lead us through that discussion, I would first like to welcome up our fabulous moderator, the wonderful Emily Bisaga-Dunn, Industry Outcomes Lead for Buildings over at Autodesk. Emily, great to have you with us here today.
Hey, how's it going, Ben? Great to be here today.
Yeah, I'm very well, thanks. I'm enjoying the show. I'm enjoying everybody's insights. Thanks for offering to lead us through this next session. Emily, before I hand over to you to walk us through that, and we'll get the panelists up here, let's maybe take a quick look at that infographic and maybe just get a quick thought from you on perhaps the most interesting talking points emerging here today. So let's get that infographic up there, get Emily sight of that. So there you can see, Emily, what's kind of standing out for you?
Yeah, the things that are really standing out for me are this idea of re-engineering business strategy, both for convergence and around outcomes. We're working on several solutions to help understand this better, from industrialized construction to convergence between infrastructure and buildings. So I'm excited to see where that goes in the future. And also, where Phil was talking about grand challenges, I think that's a great segue into what we'll be talking about on our panel today. We'll actually be kicking off with a discussion on sustainability. So I'm very excited.
Yeah, many thanks, Emily. Speaking of great segues, that feels like a perfect opportunity to perhaps introduce our panel. So we'll get them up here to find out how some of those emerging ideas, including that previous discussion around outcomes, data, sustainability, talent, are impacting the space. So please give a warm virtual welcome to Evelyn Lee, founder at Practice of Architecture and Senior Experience Designer over at Slack. Matt Goff, Director of Innovation at global consultancy and construction firm Mace. Anthony Ruto, Director of Research Engineering at Autodesk. And joining us once again, Phil Bernstein from the Yale School of Architecture. Folks, great to have you all with us. Many thanks for joining us. I'm not taking part in this panel discussion. I'm going to leave you in the very capable hands of Emily here, who's going to be taking us through this discussion. But we will be back with some some questions for you later on. Folks in the audience, if you do have any questions for any of our panel members, please do let us know what those are in the chat, and we will get you up here as soon as possible. For now, Emily, over to you.
Thanks, Ben. All right, so our first question is going to be around sustainability. So how might the industry gain global alignment around sustainability? And really, how do we come together to ensure sustainability is truly viewed as an opportunity rather than just a cost? And to add on to this, I'm going to put one last part in this question. Where and how should the industry prioritize efforts around sustainability? So I'm going to pass the mic first to Anthony, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Emily. And hello, everyone. Welcome to this particular event. And I'd just like to reflect on COP26. I had the opportunity to lead a panel discussing zero carbon buildings at the event, and this is part of a climate innovation forum. And one of the things that we discussed was very much, at least the understanding that the built environment is responsible for 40% of carbon emissions, which naturally is leading to the rising climate. And the goal of COP26 is trying to arrive at a consensus where we could achieve a limit to this rise in temperature at the 1.5 degree limit. Now, I mentioned COP26 because it's very relevant to this discussion around global alignment on an approach that can be taken towards achieving sort of a more sustainable outcome. We want to be thinking about sort of sharing best practice. So the World Green Building Council had an individual who was part of their group presenting as part of the panel discussion, and this was Victoria Bowers rather, she talked about the opportunity where many companies have got together as part of this network to discuss some of the things that they are doing to achieve zero carbon buildings, right? And then trading notes on how they've been able to achieve the same. Now, importantly, it's quite a diverse group of companies across the world, and so sharing best practice across the world is one way in which we can educate each other on how to achieve this. We had a gentleman, from Train Technology, so Jose Lalogier, and he talked about vice president or president of their operations, and he talked about, importantly, the opportunity to leverage very energy efficient heating and cooling mechanisms as part of buildings and how you might operate them. So consider that if you're able to operate and reduce your carbon footprint in that sense, it does allow you to achieve zero carbon buildings as well because of the reduced impact on the environment that you're able to achieve. Now, adopting technologies like these is another way in which we can together achieve an alignment on how to, again, achieve more sustainable outcomes in the built environment. Finally, the important point that was also raised as part of the discussion was this opportunity for governments to lead the effort, right? So we've seen with electric cars and electrification in general, setting limits on carbon emissions from cars might be an approach you can, actually use to encourage folks to switch over to a better solution. The same can apply to buildings. If buildings have got limits on their emissions, then you would ensure that at least if you are going to be using so much energy or constructing in a certain way, which may not be the best practice, you would have a limit that the government has set as the main target. So these are just some ideas in how you might be able to achieve alignment in sustainability.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to hear from another panelist on this.
I'm happy to jump in here, Emily, if I can. So thanks for the invitation to be on the panel first and foremost. I'd like to perhaps throw in a dose of evangelism around the climate emergency here, and not necessarily just the a green evangelism, but also a commercial evangelism to this as well. It's interesting to be in a session here today, Autodesk sponsored, where the outcomes team are still talking about kind of quantifying the value of sustainability. And that's certainly not where we sit currently as MACE. Climate risk is investment risk, and our clients and our funders are all very much alive to this concept of, that their investment, their funding, their portfolios, are very much at risk of the climate emergency and are needing to really divest and to improve and change their portfolios to protect that kind of long-term fiscal investment. And I think, the other part, and it's part of your question, is, how do we look at this as an opportunity over a cost? I think there's two angles to this for me. One, what is the cost of not changing? You look at some of you look at ExxonMobil as an example, right? 2007, $500 billion company, the most valuable and most profitable company in the world. 2020, its sort of value has collapsed to circa 175 billion. The green sharks circle ExxonMobil, the shareholders, big demand for what is your long-term strategy? How are you going to shift to renewable energy? How are you going to help to kind of address this climate emergency? And that's true for all of us who work in business. We will have to be able to demonstrate and prove our response and what we are doing to kind of reduce carbon emissions. And then the second lens on that is that, we're sort of really proving this time and time again at Mace, good climate decisions are generally good project decisions as well. You look at the kind of go-tos for, right, how do I reduce carbon? It starts with making really sensible decisions about what you're going to build in the first place. So do I need to build a new office or a new facility? Can I refurbish? Can I reuse? Beyond that, how do you, in design stage, it becomes, how can I make that design as lean and efficient as I possibly can, right? How can I reduce the materials? How can I really kind of make this as effective as I possibly can? That's a good commercial decision, as it is a climate one. And then lastly, it's about that kind of material and construction process. And again, the more efficient you are with that, the less material you're using, the better materials, the better the outcome for the climate and the better the outcome for the costs. So for me, lots of things are stacking up now. It's not just a right thing to do from a climate perspective. It's a good thing to do commercially. It's a good thing to do fiscally. It's great for, driving purpose within your businesses. And for me, the tables are very much turned, and it's how we should all be going to work each and every day.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Matt. That's an inspiring answer. I really appreciate your thoughts there. We're going to change topics slightly because we're doing a rapid fire of 3 questions here. The next question is going to be, how is data or the lack of data driving or hindering innovation in architecture, engineering, and construction today? How do we create the right AEC environments for cross-discipline, data-driven innovation to flourish? And so I'm going to pass the mic over to Evelyn for this one. I'm excited to hear her insights.
Emily, thank you. I think, Amy, Phil, Paul, and even Ben, with his intro, talked about how data is driving innovation in the AECO space. We have so many more data points coming in right now that we are struggling with coherence and dealing with data craziness. I'm going to cop some of Phil's language for my own response to this question. But for me, when it comes to creating the right AEC environment, it really comes down to culture. So I'm speaking mostly from an architect perspective, obviously being an architect, but I've seen firm leadership who is sometimes reluctant to share libraries across studios, let alone principals being willing to share data and knowledge between firms. So here I am in tech, working in Slack and Salesforce, who recently acquired us. And while we each have a lot of IP that we're protecting, there's a culture of open source code that allows them to innovate collectively so much faster and move so much quicker than the AECO space. So for me, it's really our ability to break down the silos, not only between firm and consultants, but the bigger unspoken one that we've created between ourselves that is obviously collectively holding us back. For me, it's, again, linking back to Phil's keynote and Brunelleschi, it's that we actually keep eating all the radishes. So how do we share more of the collective meal, I guess?
Excellent.
And maybe I can comment on this, because I think in a way, Matt's strategy on this has a lot to do with the answer to this question, which is what we know about the highly disaggregated building industry is that there have to be external motivators for people to share their data, right? It's not just a question of technology. There's plenty of technology out there for moving stuff around, and there's lots of love in the world, between men and women of goodwill. We all want to share data, but we just can't do it, when what Matt was talking about was this idea that his clients are looking for sustainable outcomes. And so they're holding the overall team responsible for getting to, say, net zero outcomes. And when that as a demand is created externally, then we as architects and engineers and contractors will sit around and solve the rest of this problem. We will solve it because the client's been clear about what they want and they'll pay us to do it. Otherwise, there's zero motivation to share data. It's getting worse because we all have a lot more data now but no extrinsic context in which to share it.
I just jump in
That
and
make
add
any
one more
sense?
thing as well. This relates to this, which is, data does present the opportunity, just as you say, Phil. It's very much around the challenge it presents, but also the opportunity. So consider that if, for example, you were to put sensors in a building and monitor its actual performance as used in practice, right? So you could be looking at how the temperature in different rooms varies and being able to then control the heating systems or cooling systems for the building to compensate for that. But through learning, you can actually make things more efficient. So this is where AI comes in as an opportunity, that it can consume all this data and then actually leverage a certain amount of it to control and provide a better outcome, which could be reduced energy consumption, which again gives you a more sustainable outcome. Consider as we design buildings in the conceptualization phase where in structural engineering, it really does rely on the experts in the field to provide the best structural design for the integrity required for the building design. But we can automate some of these aspects, again, using data, right? So that if we know that the earthquake loads and the different conditions and the materials being used are going to provide a certain context for the building to operate, then how can we use AI to predict what might be the best structural design for this building design? So we can actually automate a lot of these things, taking that data into account. And AI feeds on data and then produces the best outcomes. So if you want to improve your accuracy and performance, you need to provide more data. So while data is challenging in some ways, there's too much of it. Actually, it is the input for much more important outcomes if we target it in the right way.
I completely agree, but I think I was just going to say, and I'd be interested in Evelyn's response to this. In terms of externalities, if AI is really going to come and help us in the way you're describing, Anthony, we need a ton of data. You cannot train those machine learning algorithms without a ton of data. And we don't have a ton of data as in our individual silos, right? We're going to have to find a way to share data if we're going to leverage AI as a technology. I mean, that's my kind of crude understanding of the problem. Evelyn, you might want to comment on that.
I mean, no, I completely agree. It's understanding how to share it. If you have data on one building, even if you look at one of the world's largest firms and kind of the collective data you can get from those buildings, each one is a prototype. Each one is very site specific. We need a wealth of data to kind of inform that model for it to truly see the gains that we're talking about.
Yeah, can I just add one more thing? I think I totally agree with where this is going in terms of we need more data and we need to be open and we need to be sharing. I just probably put my green hat on again, right? And so the industry's not had any problems in sharing safety data, and actually it's the one area where we seem to be quite willing to collaborate because we've got a common goal, right? Nobody wants to hurt anybody when they go to work every day, right? We want everybody to be safe and well. And we've now got a kind of, a bigger wave or challenge potentially coming in terms of the climate emergency. And again, it's just driving a bit of a different behavior in the industry. It feels sort of Keynote talked about how change ain't that rapid in the sector. But all of a sudden, and I've been working in construction for 10 years, in the last 2 years, I am watching things go faster now than they have ever done in that 10. And that's because there's kind of renewed sort of sense of purpose around it. It's staring us in the face. And therefore, if you are working in groups or areas where people aren't sharing data, then maybe go and get a new network and explore elsewhere, because there's plenty of people in this industry that are really trying to drive change at pace.
Great, thank you. I see Ben on the stage. So Ben, would you like to jump in?
Yes, well, I'm just conscious of time, and I think we've got some questions in the audience as well. So I'd like to try and bring some of the audience in as well at this point if we can. So our first audience question is from Mal from Falkrow. Hi there, Mal. Mal, I can see you loud and clear. I can't hear you as of yet.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I've got you now. Yeah, we're starting 2022 Fantastic. As we finished 2021. There we go, on mute. There we go, Mal. Lovely to have you with us. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to take a step back, really. There are some amazing minds in this industry, some really clever people that are doing some really special things. And one of the problems I've seen, I've been in the industry 35 years, I've worked in design, construction and operation. And some of these people are so special, but the world they have to exist within actually holds them back. And they end up having to compete. They're offering something different and unique. It's hard for the less innovative businesses to understand, and it's lowest price wins the work. So that they're fighting with one arm tied behind their back from the start, and it seems crazy to me, because if you want to actually deliver projects low risk, greater certainty, not hurting anyone, all those sorts of things, why do you want to go down the lowest price route? And my example in my chat was, if you have to go to court, you don't go and choose the cheapest lawyer. You want someone who's really going to change the game for you. And I think we need to be celebrating some of these specialist people and really allowing them to have the role that they should be having on projects, and not have them in the corner getting paid bottom dollar when really they could very much turbocharge this transformation. They understand, and I've worked with lots of them, that actually there's some process changes needed. We need to go back to basics and say, actually, there's still a gap between design and construction. There's still a gap between us doing things in that manufacturing sense properly. And there are people who have proven over the last 10 or 20 years that they can unlock some of that value. And I'd really like them to be set free, and for people to go into business with them and pay them properly, give them proper status on a job. And I think we can see the benefits of their wisdom.
It's a great point, Mal. Let's throw it over to the panel. Changing the conversation from cost to value, I guess. It's been a bit of a theme here today. Who wants to take that one first? I'll take hands from the panel if anyone wants to go first. Matt, yeah, I can see you, yeah.
I'd just like to say Mal for Prime Minister.
I'll back him.
Not a chance.
He seems far too principled. But let's maybe come to you, Phil, if we can, yeah.
Well, I've been teaching a course for the last couple of years where I ask my students to design some AECO business, and it only has to have one characteristic. It cannot be fee for service or fixed price value exchange. You have to, you can do anything you want in the building industry, and you have to write a business plan, but you cannot sell your services on an hourly rate basis or at lowest first cost. There has to be some other value conversion proposition. And I think the answer to or the avenue of investigation to answer this really interesting question is, how can some of these emergent players deliver value by outcomes, by making things happen instead of selling commoditized services? And if you look at, in the sustainability realm, as we've been talking about, there's a huge array of opportunities to do that, because just in terms of how the whole transaction of the building enterprise comes together. But if the organizing principle is, we want to get to X, and if we get to X, we're going to get paid for X, that will break us out of this lowest first cost commodification. That's been my thesis, at least.
Yeah, Evelyn, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, so there's tools out there, right? Like a Cove tool, who I think just got their first round of funding, which is really taking complex energy modeling and distilling it down for kind of the everyday firm to use. So that's where I kind of actually see a lot of our specialists ending up. I think the interesting thing is other people are seeing the value in this specialists as well. So the talent question is a much bigger one for me, because I think, we're no longer competing with one another for talent. We are competing with the startups. We are competing with tech. There is wonderful places for those people to go and get paid their worth, and they will go and find those spaces. And we might see the gains on the back end, but we also just might lose them to another industry in the process.
Great stuff. Thanks, Evelyn. Thanks for the question, Matt. Let us know when that election campaign starts, and I'm sure everybody here will be voting for you. Many thanks, Matt. Much appreciated.
If I could just leave you with just one thing. A previous employer of mine always said, unofficially, what they're really looking for is tried and tested innovation, which in itself explains the problem we're facing.
Yes, absolutely. I see the paradox. Mark, many thanks. Thanks for the question. Up next, I think we've got Prakash from JLL. Hi there, Prakash. Here we go. We're getting Prakash up. There he is. Hey, Prakash, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Very well, thanks. Very well. Prakash, we're running short on time, so let's get your question to the panel.
Brilliant. So my question is around sustainability. Sustainability is often synonymous with environmental sustainability, and a lot of what the panel's spoken about is climate change and reduction in carbon. But there's other pillars of sustainability around economic and social, and our industry's got challenges there too. We've got an aging workforce. We're struggling to attract talent. We've also got the cost pressures, which put stress on our supply chain. So how do we ensure that this very important issue around the climate catastrophe doesn't drown out some of these other issues, which are arguably just as important?
Yeah, multifaceted challenge. Many thanks for the question, Prakash. Let's maybe come to you, Anthony, if we can first with that one.
Oh, absolutely. So one of the things to consider is when we consider how you might build buildings, construct in different locations around the world, one of the focuses has to be looking at the local workforce and looking at local materials, because that will give you the best outcome for that community. The funding can come in, but it'll be, used to pay for the local workforce, leveraging any materials that are available, the local know-how, to ensure that as you construct the building, it's with the local workforce. This, in effect, does reduce the carbon footprint of the eventual building and the built environment around it. So that's one aspect. How can we actually develop solutions that can help folks achieve this is very much, even as I said before, around the design conceptualization phase, where you've got the design concept. You might now start weaving in the idea of where is it going to be built, looking at the geolocations, the expected performance of the building based on environmental issues and pressures. So I mentioned earthquake before, but we can now bring in, exactly what you described, which is again local workforce, and again the impact of this building once built for that local environment. So these elements can be brought into the design process to ensure that we achieve something that again has a better impact, not just in terms of the building itself, but for the community that's going to be either using it or at least helping build it as part of the key outcome that we're striving for, which is again, a more equitable world where we are not creating buildings or creating a built environment that's harmful for the planet. I hope that somewhat answers the question.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. I'm going to come to Matt. Matt, if you can do it in 30 seconds or less, we're almost out of time.
Yeah, really quickly. So good question, Prakash. I think from my perspective, what being good and being sustainable is about is actually a sort of systems view. It encourages us to really try and think a bit broader in terms of our impacts or outcomes, as Phil would refer to it. And within that, I think we all recognise that there are many other areas of the industry that we need to address, which includes diversity, it includes skills, it includes attracting new workers to the industry. And here in the UK, we've got a net zero strategy. We've made commitments in terms of our carbon reduction. It's quite clear to install, I think it's 1 million heat pumps we need to install by 2030. That's taking gas out of homes and putting electric in. And we need to train 50,000 new gas installers or electric installers in order to do that, because the 50,000 that we have currently doesn't accommodate that kind of growth in demand. So all these things are interlinked, but I think the kind of systems lens on it does encourage us to perhaps be a bit more, build better across all aspects.
Thanks, Matt. Evelyn, I can see you've got something to say. Unfortunately, my producer is telling me that we are out of time, unfortunately. Feel free to connect with folks after the call. Obviously, there will be an opportunity for us to get those questions over to you. Many thanks, Prakash, for the question. I love the interdependent nature of many of these challenges and potentially solutions as well. Convergence has been very much one of the topics here today, so very much on trend. Thank you, Prakash. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
Thank you to our panel. Thank you also to Paul and Amy earlier on as well. And thanks to you, our audience, for your time and attention here today, as well as for all of your comments and questions. It has been an absolute pleasure hosting you. I hope you all enjoyed it. Before we wrap up here, let's maybe take a quick look at what that discussion has done to our live infographic. We'll get that up there. We have one dedicated to the panel all on its own. So what's the cost of not changing, of course, climate change risk, data is driving innovation, some of the challenges, lowest price versus real innovation, some really interesting topics coming up there. Lots of learnings, lots of fascinating takeaways. Transformation, agility, flexibility, collaboration, integration, convergence, tools, skill sets, capabilities, all will be critical moving forward. And finding that right mix is something we all face as we look ahead to whatever comes next. And whilst we've covered a lot here today, obviously there were a number of talking points that merit more nuanced discussion, further exploration. So I would certainly encourage all of you to link in with our speakers and your fellow attendees on the various social platforms so that you can continue that conversation offline. And that's pretty much it. Thanks for attending. Until next time, stay safe, everyone. Best of luck with whatever you are working on in 2022. And we hope to see you back here at the next Exec Connect event very soon. Goodbye for now.